do you believe any company would hire a child from a poor single mother? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, and during the final interview, someone known as the demon instructor said that to me. It was clear this person looked down on me for being from a single mother household and had no intention of accepting me for the position. I desperately dealt with it, but the interview kept getting worse and worse. Finally reaching my limit, I took my goal out of my phone from my back and called my father. That's because my father is actually the bank's president. My name is Jessica Chastain. I'm a 23-year-old college senior looking for a job. My parents got divorced last year, so my mom is now a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives, naturally. I stayed with my mom, but my future plans were influenced by my father. My father is the president of the bank, the chief executive officer. This bank is the largest in the country, and I aspired to be a bank employee because I admired my father for working there. And tomorrow, I have my final interview. Honestly, I'm not very good at studying. And when I said my goal was to work at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to stop me but also ridiculed me. I thought it would all end after the interview, but looking back, it was really awful. One day, during my college life, "Hey Jessica, have you decided where you're going to go after graduation?" Her name was Nancy. She's a friend I met in college. For me, it's just the one choice, the bank. I answered her question without hesitation. Then the people around us who had been listening to our conversation started to murmur. Did I say something strange? Just as I thought that, Nancy spoke up first. You know, Jessica, it's hard to say, but I think you should know your place. Huh? To my surprise, someone I thought was my friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back in frustration, another guy approached me and said it's impossible for you. That place is the largest bank in the country, you know. It's the most difficult to get into from this university, with only one person getting a job from there in the past 10 years. I know that. Of course, I haven't told anyone around me that my father is the head of the bank I'm applying to. If I did, people would likely say I got through the back door considering my abilities. If that happened, I'd be causing trouble for my father, and it would be painful to feel like my skills aren't good enough. I didn't like being talked about, especially when it wasn't true. Jessica, I'm saying this for your own good. While I don't need your advice, as I looked around, everyone's eyes were on me, their cold stares pierced my heart. Why do I have to hear this? As I thought that, the teacher who had noticed the commotion came over. What's going on here? The boy from earlier answered, Chastain says she wants to work at North Trust Bank. At that, the teacher's face also tensed up, and then she said something unthinkable. Are you taking society for granted? Even the teacher, who was supposed to be on the student's side, denied my dream. There was no one there to stand up for me. Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that? Of course, I objected. But the teacher piled on more. You're naive. My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They say he's a demon interviewer. The teacher's surname was Thomas, a 29-year-old woman, so if I encountered an interviewer with the same surname Thomas, it would likely be her father, a demon interviewer. You say? Yes, that's right. My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. That's what it was at the Sun Plaza branch. And you're from a single mother household, right? I wondered why she would ask that, but I honestly answered yes. Then the teacher showed his sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. But from that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Nancy whom I thought was my friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves. For me, it was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions became worse with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank exam process had 4 stages. The first stage was a written test, the second and third stages were interviews by people from the head office. In the fourth and final stage, interviews were conducted by the person in charge of hiring for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager. In other words, it was an interview with the highest-ranking hiring manager. By the way, I wanted to work at the bank at the Sun Plaza, and I had managed to pass the third stage. Why, how did you pass the third stage? Even those who had looked down on me were now surprised and anxious about my progress. That's because most of them had failed their desired company's second stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began. In my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. Perhaps I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus only on myself. My motivation was solely to get an offer from North Trust Bank. My mind was only on that. But then one day, Teacher Thomas started attacking me in front of everyone after class. "All right, everyone, listen up," the teacher shouted to everyone who was preparing to leave. At her voice, everyone turned around and stopped what they were doing. I also paid attention, wondering what was going on. And then the teacher started talking. "This time, Jessica Chastain has cleared the third round of North Trust Bank's exams." The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy. However, with the next statement, everyone around me seemed to catch their breath. "But it seems she'll fail the fourth round, huh?" "What do you mean?" I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. "The reason is the interviewer for the fourth round has been decided to be my father, the demon instructor Thomas." Oh, the surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. "Serves you right. Know your place. Good." The classroom was filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends turned their back on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way to relieve stress. The stress from job hunting is immeasurable, so I wanted to think that they were just harassing me to relieve that stress. But it was different. I realized the situation around me. This was jealousy. They were envious of me challenging something they themselves wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her who isn't even good at studying. There is no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Chastain is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult, it's the most challenging, it's impossible. So why is Chastain trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange, the reality that becomes apparent as job hunting progresses. Among those who pass, those who fail, and various others, no one here has much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, as her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother encouraged me gently. Wrapped in such warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. "Don't forget, just do your best," I left the house after receiving words of encouragement from my mother. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. At first, there were nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would survive from this group. My name was called just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate. "Please come in." "Hello, thank you." My final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. One was Thomas, the teacher's father, just as the teacher had said. The second was a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. He looked about 10 years younger than my father, a man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, faced a computer at a slight distance. The interview began with questions from Thomas, starting with the typical self-introduction. I was asked about my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. I don't really like female bank employees. The complaints started suddenly. Not knowing what to say in response, I fell silent. Thomas continued, because they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview from here on. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me, just like a man. I tried to appeal and respond flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far, yet the chief hiring officer, who should be higher ranking than Thomas, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Thomas. Maybe Thomas is pressuring this person too, that's what I thought. However, there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Thomas spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. You seem to come from a single-mother household, am I wrong? He was probably looking at the documents I submitted from university. They included my address and family composition. Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother. As soon as he heard my words, Thomas began to laugh, his sinister smile echoing through the room. I see you're from a single-mother household. What business does a poor person have here? As soon as he heard my response, he blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I became sweaty. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious. But it was Thomas who started talking first. Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you? He said that while mocking me. Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired? You're going to assume I'm poor. I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Thomas reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer? I was frustrated, but I couldn't say anything back. The bank my father worked at, which I had always admired, I don't want to lose because of this one man. But I don't know what to say in return. Why don't you say something? Thomas further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly. I became incredibly calm, to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. Understood, Thomas seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up? Finally, another person spoke, having been sitting the whole time. You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do? I know about you because I've heard from my daughter. It seems that the teacher and Thomas had shared information. Is this not a leak of information? Well, that doesn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. What are you doing? Making a phone call? Are you making a mockery of this interview? Stop it now, or I'll reject you right here, Thomas threatened me. But I wasn't fazed at all. Then I spoke into the phone. Hello, Dan. Your father. What can a person from a single-parent family do? Clinging to their separated father, was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Thomas. Hey, Dad, can you come to the interview room now? Of course, I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me there, okay? And so I hung up the phone. The person in charge of the recording was staring at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. And of course, the one who reacted the most was Thomas. Pointing at me, he said, "You're finished. Making a phone call during an interview, unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something." I finally decided to argue back against him. I couldn't take it anymore. This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Thomas. The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had been able to stand up to this man's abusive behavior until now. As evidence, the recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Thomas to be punished? Thomas slammed his right hand on the table with all his might. A loud thud echoed throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. And then I spoke to Thomas. Luke Damant, you know him, right? For a moment, Thomas had a look on his face as if I had hit a nerve with my question. He immediately countered, "Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank." To Thomas, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added some more words, "So if my last name was Damant until recently, would you think it's a coincidence?" Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Thomas then stood up from his chair and muttered, "What did you say?" His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. Jessica Damant. That was my full name until recently. My father is Luke Damant, yes, the president of the bank, 63-year-old Luke Damant. What? You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening. Thomas let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview. But at that moment, my father entered the room. As the door opened, he then said words that echoed my own feelings. "This is hardly an interview at all, Mr. Damant. Thank you for your hard work." The two men stood up and greeted my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt that his presence was extraordinary. The president, Thomas's face turned pale as he muttered. His mouth remained open. My father then spoke to him, "Hey, Thomas, what were you doing to my daughter, huh?" My father was a big man who had practiced judo, and now with his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening. Even the confident Thomas, the moment he heard my father's voice, "Yes, sir," squeaked out. "I don't want to hear your answer," and then, Green, it seemed that Green was the chief hiring officer. This was my first time learning his name because the nameplate was bent, and I couldn't see it. "Yes, sir." "Aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now?" "I'm very sorry," the man called Green bent at a 90-degree angle and bowed. The young clerk looked scared at the sight. Even he, who had done nothing wrong, was drenched in sweat. "Hey, clerk, what's your name?" My father suddenly called out in a gentle voice. The change in his voice only made it more terrifying. "My name is Finn." "Mr. Finn, can you send today's interview record to my PC?" "Of course." "You're also recording the audio, right?" I later heard that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed but also recorded as backup. Thanks to that, Thomas's misconduct was exposed to my father, and he was punished. Looking at Thomas, he was trembling. He was like a frog stared down by a snake. "Hey, Thomas." "Yes?" "What is it?" The frightened Thomas couldn't even speak clearly. He was a completely different person from earlier. "Apologize to my daughter." "It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank." At my father's words, Thomas bowed deeply and apologized. "Sorry, but I couldn't forgive him even after seeing that." "Dad, I can't forgive him," when I murmured that, weakly. "Of course," my father said, walking up to Thomas. It looked like a lion about to hunt a small animal. "Thomas, do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this?" My father pressured him. Thomas was frozen. "You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her?" No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Thomas began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. At least over 100 people. I was shocked to hear that he had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful, even though it was my father's company. "Hey, Green," my father said, "yes, I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this. So, I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Thomas, I'll never forgive you," he gasped, frightened. "I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right?" Hearing this, Thomas collapsed on the spot, as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe, and so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas, based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Thomas were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned, and Thomas was sued by the company and the victims group. Thomas, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, "Oh, Miss Chastain, congratulations on your job offer," the teacher with a forced smile congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. "And then, Miss Thomas, this is Luke Damant, the president of North Trust Bank." "Oh, yes, I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is. And he is Jessica Chastain's father." "What? What did you say?" I added to the surprised teacher's words. "He's my mother's ex-husband and my father." My words caused a stir in the class. Is that so? Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they had been friendlier to me. "Miss Chastain's father is the president of North Trust Bank," the teacher said upon learning the truth, becoming an empty shell. The principal then said to the teacher, "This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Demant's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Demant's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you?" "Well, that is never mind the excuses, tell me only the truth." Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, "Yes, Mr. Damant wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Chastain voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue." "What? Leave the school? If you decide to stay, we intend to charge you the entire amount of the discontinued support. Naturally, I don't think you can afford it. So, what will you do?" The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teachers seemed to understand as well and ultimately resigned from the school, effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action, one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary banker like my father.